Another stroll in the shadows, one more familiar street. It seems that history is bound to repeat. That's how my destiny's drawn. Just when the story is shifting, turns out it's too good to last. Maybe I just can't escape from the past. As I go chasing the dawn, why don't you just release me and go your separate way? My heart has nothing left to give away. Another drink for my troubles, another cold cigarette. I'm not the type, but I'll take a bet that flame will keep burning on as I go chasing the dawn, as I go chasing the dawn, as I go chasing the dawn.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Halsey Live. We have a very special guest, Mr. Alex Eisenberg, the historian who teaches us everything about Islam and fascism and everything. Whenever we have a space with him, we just can't get enough. So I figured now we'll have some time to talk to him without being interrupted by idiots. So, Alex, how you doing, man?
Hi, good to be here. First time for me to be on this podcast, but I think it's pretty early for you too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'm on episode 982, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, okay. I've been doing this since 2017. I just take breaks.
Okay.
Is there a place people can find you before we get started?
I'm on X as Alex Eisenberg. If you see my name under there, my name is Eisenberg. I just use this one now on the screen.
Yeah, no one can see it, but
so I'm Alex Eisenberg, and I'm known as Eisenberg 2 because my first account was banned, and now I'm Eisenberg 2.
Yeah, that's all you got to do is, be telling the truth, and then X will make sure that you're kicked off or suspended or censored in some way. It's one of those weird things.
It is very weird, yeah. And I lost all my followers, so if you've not seen me, heard me in my former space, then please follow me again.
And if not, reach out to me, and I'll give you his Twitter followers if you can't follow them, and you can give him a follow. So, Alex, I want to jump right into it. I had James Lindsay on the other day, and we were talking, and he got in. First of all, it was I knew this, but very few people do, that Mein Kampf has 2 volumes. And we were getting into it, and we were talking about the rise of Hitler, and I thought, there's so much he wasn't even getting into, like I think you said the Thule Society was called.
Thule Society, yeah, that was the beginning party.
But they're crazy nuts, like they're Atlantis believers and stuff like that, correct?
Correct. So let me jump into this a little bit and explain why I know so much about this. Okay, so I'm an American citizen. I am, of course, a Jew. And I'm not Jewish, I'm a Jew. So I make a distinct difference between being Jewish and being a Jew. I live in Germany. I speak perfect German in the meantime. I read and write German, and I work together with a handful of historians who are specialized in the coming of the new type of Jew hatred, which is known as anti-Semitism. Prior to the 1850s, anti-Semitism did not exist. It was just plain Jew hatred. Anti-Semitism came up in the 1850s, after the Jews were emancipated around 1806 by Napoleon Bonaparte. At that time, there were lots of different movements throughout Europe, and one of the movements brought along this new country around 1871, 1872, which was called Germany. Up until then, there was no Germany. There were plenty of, or an assortment of kingdoms, the main kingdom being Prussia. Prussia aligned all the other kingdoms and duchies and everything into one new entity, which they called the Reich, meaning the empire.
Mm-hmm.
And that was around 1871. So Germans, lots of them thought, okay, we might be German, but we're actually more Bavarian or something else. And they had to look for a direction of, how do we unite? Where are we from? Why are we a people? So all these crazy ideas came up. And after World War I, after the World War I was lost, there were still people looking for this common identity to understand why they lost this war. And there was one guy who came up, but not only him, but this one guy called Sabotendorf. So that was just a name he took on because he said he was adopted by a Baron von Sabotendorf. And he, like many others, believed in a cult. He converted to Islam because he lived in Turkey. He came back to Germany. And when he was in Germany, he said, as a German, I believe we are a people of the highest race, and we are descendants of the best people of Atlantis. When Atlantis went down, we were the best ones, and we got saved on an island that is called Thule, Thule. And that's why we will find the Thule Society.
It's nuts. So nuts.
And they all believed in this occult, this occult thing, and they were all Jew haters because the Jews would be the worst people in the world and the natural enemy of the Germanic people.
The Atlanteans.
Yeah, from Atlantis. So the Jews are also from Atlantis, but they are the worst from Atlantis. And that's why this idea came up. It is not only a religion, but it is this ethnic thing that was coincided with what was happening in France around 30 years earlier during the Dreyfus era or Dreyfus affair. We all might remember Alfred Dreyfus. Yeah. And so this all together, and they founded this society. And out of that society, they decided we're going to go into politics. And they founded a party that was called the German Workers' Party. And many of the members of the Thule Society were members of that party. And that's when Hitler came into the party, and he became like the leader of that party because of his talent in narrating. And because he was such a great narrator and had so much charisma, they decided, okay, he might be our Messiah. They believe that they need a Messiah too, and this could be Adolf Hitler, and he will be groomed. So there was a guy by the name of Dietrich Eckart who knew a lot of important people in industry and in culture and all over the place, and he knew, how to present yourself in a proper way. And he helped groom Hitler, and Hitler became the leader of the NSDAP, which is the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which is a very long name. And as is the tendency in Germany to abbreviate things.
Right, just like in Hebrew.
Socialist, just plain, the national is pronounced National in German, so National became Nazi. The socialists are Sozi, and the nationals are Nazi. That's it. That's where we get the word Nazi from. And the Nazis started calling themselves that too, but only when they were just joking. When they were really talking about themselves, they always called themselves the National Socialist. That's why some people don't understand that nationalism and socialism goes together. Whereas communism is global, National Socialism is on a local level.
That's what they liked about Italian fascism. That was what drew them to it.
Well, fascism had this idea of being a national movement, But the National Socialists had added one thing that the fascists didn't have, that was racism. So the fascists just had this idea of a nation. Early fascists who followed Mussolini in the 1920s, there were plenty of Jews who followed him. To make it clear, his girlfriend at the time, he was married already, but he had his favorite girlfriend. He was Jewish, and she made him famous because she wrote books about him, which made him famous. That's how Mussolini got famous, and that inspired Hitler. So in 1924, Hitler thought he'll do the same thing that Mussolini did, and he will march on Berlin. Now, the crazy thing is the Italian fascists had black shirts, and thought the Germans needed something similar. They were looking for something, and they found a whole load of brown shirts that were meant for the German army in Africa during World War I, and they never got used. So they bought these cheap brown shirts that were just left over, and that's why they had the brown shirts.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's just, funny enough, a lot of national movements, that's how they got their designs and all of that. They just found something that was easy.
Yeah, that was easy, cheap, and that was just laying around. And there was this connection already because this was an army shirt. It was used by the German army, but no longer in use because they had no more. They didn't have any colonies anymore in Africa after World War I. They lost all of them.
So it was interesting. Dinesh D'Souza wrote a book about this, about the rise of fascism, what fascism really was. And he explains the distinction between the brown shirts and the Nazis, how they weren't the same thing,
Yeah. So the brown shirts were known as the SA, which the Storm Division. The German word is Sturmabteilung, so it is the Storm Division. The Storm Division was the terror arm of the Nazi party, but they were not really one. The leader of the Nazis was Adolf Hitler. The leader of the SA was a guy by the name of Röhm. And Röhm was really far more radical in all his beliefs.
But he was also very open to the same degeneracy of the Weimar Republic, like the gay stuff and the...
But he was far more radical. He was willing to tear everything to pieces, where Hitler was still, okay, we can find a way. And this happened especially after Hitler was arrested and convicted of trying to bring a coup around. That was in 1924 in Munich, where they tried to start a march on Berlin that was stopped by the police and the army. There were shots fired, people were killed, Hitler was arrested, convicted, and had to go to jail. And when he was in jail, that's when he wrote Mein Kampf.
Why is it that most people don't know there are 2 volumes to Mein Kampf? I knew it, but even as James was talking about it, he said it took him, like, he didn't even know it at first.
Well, the Mein Kampf that we know is the Mein Kampf that was published after the Nazis really came to power. Prior to that, Mein Kampf was really not that interesting. No, people didn't buy it. It was not a book that had any substance. It had no importance whatsoever. It was like the first edition had something like 9,000 copies that were sold in all of Germany, a country with over 60 million population at the time.
Wow.
It had no meaning whatsoever. As the Nazis grew in power, they also grew in influence. So by the time the Nazis really became influential, meaning when they gained governmental power, it started in individual states. Now, we have to also understand that Germany today is a country that has 16 individual states. It's a federal country. Right. And back in the 1920s, during the Weimar Republic, they had a similar type of system. And so the states where the Nazis became more powerful, that's where people started buying this book, not because they supported the Nazis as much as they were afraid of the Nazis. And to know, what is this about?
Mm-hmm.
Who voted for the Nazis, they were convinced because they heard Hitler speak. Hitler was a very charismatic character at the time. He used everything that was modern to reach the people, meaning he flew from one city to the next, something the other politicians didn't do. He got dressed differently. He approached differently. He had his speeches in public. He went into places where they were selling tickets so that people could hear him narrate. They loved the fact that he came up somewhere and they sold tickets like crazy because people were really interested to hear what he has to say. And they left overwhelmed with what he had to say.
Interesting.
And those who did not appreciate him also read the book so that they could say, this guy is nuts. He wants to start another war. We just got out of a war that, and the people were still running, there were people who were still, this is like, 10, 12 years after World War I, where you still had people, with half their head shot off, where people were blinded, and nobody wanted another war. And here he is, writing about where he wants to take Germany. And that's where a lot of people outside of Germany don't understand that many voted for Hitler and believed in Hitler and wanted Hitler, not because of economic reasons as much as he promised to take away the humility of losing.
Right.
And
the idea of pride.
And of national pride, that you are not a loser. We lost not because you did not fight bravely on the front. We didn't, but because we were destroyed by the socialist and the Jew.
Mm-hmm.
The Jew is responsible for us losing the war. Now, because the Jews in Germany always had this feeling of being second class, even though Germany was good to Jews up until World War II, actually, up until Hitler. But during the 1890s, after Germany united, the Kaiser himself, meaning there were 3 Kaisers in the early era. So the first one was Kaiser Wilhelm I, then came Kaiser Wilhelm II, and the Kaiser Friedrich, and then came Kaiser Wilhelm II. He was the Kaiser at the beginning of the 20th century. His cousins, his direct cousins, were more powerful than he was. One of his cousins was the King of England, Emperor of the British Empire, and the other one was Nicholas of Russia. So you have these 3 direct cousins, all related to each other, and that's something we often forget.
I also find it interesting because of the animosity between Britain and Germany over the years for World War I, World War II, and all of that. It's kind of interesting that their leadership was related.
Well, they were all grandsons of Victoria.
Right.
Yeah.
I always forget those things. It's like one of those things, like I know this because I've learned it, but like at the same time when I talk about it, I don't ever make the connection,
And the British royal family changed their name from their German last name, which was Kobold-Sachsen, to Windsor, so that there's no connection between them and the Germans, so that they cannot be seen as an enemy force in Britain during World War I. That's where they took on the name Windsor.
Huh. Now, you were talking about how Hitler communicated. And we've gotten into many talks about this, and I want to make sure that we make this clear. Hitler was one of the first to use radio, correct?
Well, he used all different types of modern technology, which was really impressive at that time. Like I said, he flew from city to city, where most politicians at that time, if they traveled, they used the train. If they traveled all together.
Right.
Or they used an automobile. He used automobiles. He used trains. He used planes. He was all over the place. And he also used movies. So there were movies of him in airplanes over cities. That was a perspective that most people have never seen, their city from above.
That's a good
And
point.
he's looking out the window of the plane at a city from above. Then he's on the ground giving speeches. And all these films came together, and that impressed people. They said, he will modernize us, and he will also make us proud. And we are Germans. We are no longer defeated. The economic situation was also one that we are defeated and we are losing money, and we're poor and we're impoverished because of the French and the British and the Americans. America lent tons of money to Germany. And then during the Great Depression, they said, give us back our money. And that threw Germany into a bigger depression than America ever knew.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny, whenever the talk turns to pride, I always tell this story. When I was in D.C., I did a couple internships when I was in D.C. during college. And I used to go to these things. They would have events for interns where you could just meet people and network and all of that. And I still to this day don't know why, but I was at this one and I wound up talking to Geraldine Ferraro, right? And I'm having this whole conversation. I used to love saying to ex-politicians or current politicians and say, tell me something I'm not going to read everywhere. You know, like I'd love to hear a story like about the campaign trail or anything. And she goes, well, I don't talk about this often, so I'll tell you. She said, after we got shellacked by Reagan, we were going on our like post-election, kind of tour and thanking our supporters. And we went to Minnesota, I think she said, and we went to a union. And we said, we got in a room with the leadership and we said, we don't understand. We are the most pro-union party that ever existed. We made promises we were going to give you everything you asked for. And your guys voted for Reagan by like 90%. How could that be? And he said, it's simple. He made them proud.
Yeah.
And she said it changed her whole political outlook. Like it just she understood that things were not how she had seen, because she always thought that if you support people and if you offer them things that they want, that they're going to vote for you, and it just wasn't the case. It was the case that they felt better being proud to be Americans than they did about all the superficial crap that the Democrats had promised them at the time.
And it was a similar not only in Germany, but in many places in Europe and globally, actually. What the Nazis brought around was this idea that you are, just because you're born in a Germanic group,
mm-hmm.
part of the nation, which in German is called the Volk, V-O-L-K. So you are part of a great nation. We will help you be a part of something that is bigger than you. We will give you pride. So that was the same situation in many European countries, in the UK, and there were plenty of people in America, and they saw what once the Nazis came to power in 1933, by coincidence, not by their own design, but by the politics of Hitler's. And we have to admit, as much as he was a bastard and a monster, he was a brilliant politician at that time.
Sure.
He knew how to use everybody to get what he wanted. He understood the system better than most other people. They all thought they can keep him under control. And he turned the whole thing around. He used everything possible, mainly the terror on the streets. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean, terror on the streets? There was a police force. The police force was attached to the Weimar Republic, to the Constitution of the Weimar Republic.
Okay.
Started to take control of states. The states they took control of, they changed the situation. They said, okay, now the police is doing a pretty good job, but not the best possible job. So now we will add to the police force SA as another police force to help the police force get things done in a proper way.
Of course.
So you had a policeman, and next to the policeman wearing the uniform of the police, by his side, a brown shirt. Now the policeman is afraid that the brown shirt will beat him up. So the policeman will do what the brown shirt tells him, because the brown shirts outnumbered all the police. And that's where Rome, who was had his own power, he had about 600,000 SA in all of
600,000?
yeah,
Wow.
members of the SA, because that gave them power. You wore a brown shirt and you walked out with 2, 3 other people, you could do what the hell you want.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And within the SA, he had the power. He said, okay, we will replace the army with the SA. Who needs the army? And that's where Hitler said, okay, we need the army. He needs the generals. He needs the officers. He needs the know-how of the army. And that's where he said he has to get rid of the SA in the sense of the SA leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he got real power, because he had a substitute in the meantime. Because within the SA, there was one guy who was very, very eager to have more power. And this guy's name was Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler was actually a nobody, but he knew how to organize stuff. And he was a very early member of the Nazi Party. He marched with Hitler in 1924 during that first revolt situation. And he grew, and he was a member of the SA. And within the SA, he started a new group that would be like the security force for Hitler and the main members of the Nazi Party. That was called the SS. And the difference was that the brown shirts wore brown shirts and brown caps. The SS wore brown shirts and black caps.
Right.
And the black caps meant that they had the direct control of Hitler, because Hitler controlled Himmler. And Hitler could not control Rome. And that's where they gained full power. After they got rid of Rome, then the army, meaning the Wehrmacht, had more power. Hitler controlled the Wehrmacht, Hitler controlled the SA, the SS, and everything else, with the exception of one guy who was named Julius Streicher. This is getting very complicated now, because if you don't know the whole story, you don't get the whole picture. So Julius Streicher was how should I put this? His main goal in life was, let's get rid of Jews.
Right.
That was his. Yeah. He was a Nazi, but he was, more or less distanced from the main group in Munich. He lived nearby Nuremberg, which is the state, but a different group of people. Mm-hmm. Munich are Bavarians, Nuremberg are what they're called Franken. So it's another group of people. They have their own dialect. They are part of the Bavarian, but they are different. And he controlled that part of Bavaria as the leader of the Nazi Party there. And he published a newspaper that was called Der Stürmer. Now, the Stürmer started being published around 1924 as well. And the Stürmer came out weekly. And the Stürmer was just about terrible things, namely the Jews. Mm-hmm. The subtitle of Der Stürmer, meaning the stormer, was "The Jews are our misfortune." That was the subtitle of the whole newspaper. And all it was about was terrible things Jews do. And if there was nothing terrible to write about, then he just invented it, or he made it sound worse than it was. So let's say a Jew had a business and went into bankruptcy. Then people lost their jobs because the Jew was stealing money. Some woman got pregnant. It was the Jew who raped her or did this. Some kid had an accident. It was because of a Jew. The whole newspaper was just about destroying how terrible Jews were. Now, it's hard to sell that newspaper. So what they did is they published them in what was called the Stürmer Kasten, which was like a box with a glass front pane. And they had the newspaper spread out in that. And you could read that at bus stops, train stations, in front of churches. It was like an analog form of social media.
Yeah, or
yeah, it was. People read it, stood together, talked about it, and then went home and said, "I read in the paper." So even if your neighbor was a Jew, And he was a good guy. He was a good guy, but the rest were Jews.
Right. The good Jew, bad Jew thing.
Yeah. So that's how that got started. And that helped the Nazis spread the idea of Jews being bad.
Mm-hmm.
And Hitler could not control him. They thought he would be terrible. Hitler's own newspaper was called the Völkische Beobachter, meaning the people's observer. And that was full of Nazi propaganda too, but on a much higher, more intellectual, more academic level. And Hitler had that newspaper, and he bought it and he owned it with the help of Henry Ford, who
Yeah.
actually gave money to buy it. So this is all, it's one thing coming to the next, one added on, another thing added on. That's how he gained power. And that's within the Nazi party. There was plenty of intrigue and people hating each other. Himmler hated Goebbels. Goebbels hated Goering. Goering hated everybody. Goering was like number 2 in the party. And Goering was Hitler's favorite because they went back a long time. And Goering was a World War I air pilot. And he was an ace. And he was like the best buddy of the Red Baron, who was, everybody knows the Red Baron.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
And the Red Baron got killed, but Goering didn't get killed, and Goering was the leader of that group. So he was really famous. He was like a real war hero. Everybody knew Hermann Goering because he was a pilot. He shot down, he was a real hero. And in that time, pilots were seen like knights.
Right.
Yeah. It was like, these are real warriors. These are guys using technology and fighting one-on-one and,
Mm-hmm.
chivalry and all that.
In World War II, the American military, the American Navy especially, would not let you rise to the rank of admiral or general unless you went to pilot school. So my great uncle, Admiral Halsey, he became the oldest person to ever do it because he said he wasn't going to let his career get stalled. And he went to
Yeah.
pilot school, I think in his 50s.
So, all this that happened when Mein Kampf came out, what made Hitler like really rich was the fact that Mein Kampf was published and he had his royalties from every single copy.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody got married, they got Mein Kampf. Somebody had a baby, they got Mein Kampf. Every city, every town had to order so and so many to hand out to people when they got married, when there was special occasions, there were special editions coming out, and he got royalties from every single one.
Mm-hmm.
Second edition, or the second part, was just another way of making more money for
Right.
Hitler. Yeah.
That never ended. Like it's still very common in Western countries that's why when you hear anybody getting ready to run for a big office, they write a book. It's because what'll happen is the party winds up buying so many copies of the book that it's a way to funnel money into the candidate's like personal bank account as opposed to their campaign bank account.
Yeah. And that's what he did. That's made him very, very rich. And that also helped him once he was really important in the Nazi party. He had a lot of donations coming in from people who thought this party will really help us. They donated to other parties too, but the donations that came into the Nazi party were something that he controlled together with a guy by the name of Martin Bormann, together with others who really had their fingers on loot, on money coming in. The Nazi party itself was overrun. They had to stop taking in new memberships because they didn't know how to handle it any longer. This is pre-computer age. So the Nazis are the central group. The majority of them had this connection to the Tula Society. And that is something you always have to bear in mind. The Tula Society symbol was the swastika. That was not invented by Hitler.
That's really interesting. What I'm curious about though is to make the shift. Is why did the Germans not have a problem with Islam or the Arabs when their problem seemed to be of an issue of race? So why were the Arabs not considered, or the Turks, a lower race?
Well, there was a conflict there, but they found a way to overcome that conflict. The reason being, within the early Nazi era, meaning in the 1920s, they realized that Jews also have a group or an organization that is Zionism. They
Mm-hmm.
approved the idea of Jews leaving Germany and going somewhere.
Right.
But they also saw many of them, not all of them, but many of them thought if they all go to what was then the Mandate of Palestine, there would be a conflict arising there because Palestine is under the control of the British.
Right.
If the British Jews get together, then they would not be able to do what they want to do, build a new empire, because they still saw the British as a foe from World War I.
And for all intents and purposes, they were a foe. So it's not even like that. They weren't paranoid in thinking so.
So that's why when Amin al-Husseini became, through the grace of the Jewish governor, who was then the governor on behalf of the British Empire in the Mandate of Palestine. So Amin al-Husseini was a virulent Jew hater from the religious point of view.
Right.
And that's where the earliest contacts were made between the Nazis and Amin al-Husseini. We often have this idea that he came to Hitler and met Hitler and they met, and that started much earlier. Al-Husseini and Hitler only met one time in 1941, but the earliest contacts were made by Nazis, especially one guy by the name of Johann von Leers, who wrote to al-Husseini that his dealings with Jews is remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that we should, that's what's binding us. So the idea came up, here are two groups that have the same goal, one out of racial reasons and the other one out of religious reasons. So they are both supremacists. They have both this replacement theology, one from a racial point of view, one from a religious point of view. That is a natural binding, plus the fact that the Arabs or the Muslims control a vast area. The Muslims live in a vast area, but they don't all have control of it due to the British and the French. So if they get together, then they will be able to defeat the British and the French. The Muslims had an affinity to because the Germans did not have any colonies, something the French had and the British had. So there was an understanding, okay, these people are great and wonderful, and they are not colonialist. We Muslims have an attachment to them, and they have an attachment to us. So the Nazis then said they might be of a different race, but they have a similar worldview. So they were pardoned in the sense of, they didn't come out and pardon, but they said, you are now also a member of the Aryan group, being Arabs. You're a little lower than we are, but you have the same background, meaning coming from this background. And they had no problem with that.
And the Germans were able to broadcast their propaganda through Radio Ziesen to these people.
Good that you bring it up now, because Radio Ziesen is a really interesting, and for me personally, a great place to study, or a great thing to study about. Let me just say, why is it called Radio Ziesen? What is the background of that? Because it is a crazy name. Most people have never heard of it. What does radio mean at that time? So in 1919, when World War I was finalized through a peace treaty in Versailles, one of the things Germany was not permitted to have, next to a bigger army, next to the Navy, Air Force, and so on, was they were not permitted to have a radio antenna higher than the Eiffel Tower, which sounds ridiculous today, but back then in the 1920s, the Eiffel Tower was one of the most powerful radio stations in the world because it was one of the tallest buildings in the world. I think maybe, the Empire State Building wasn't built yet, So it was, and it was used as an antenna for radio signals.
Sure.
The Germans were not permitted to have a radio station of that power, but a German company by the name of Telefunken came up with another way of broadcasting further without having that type of antenna. And the place they needed geographically to do it was special because it had to be out in the open. There was no mountains in between. And they found this village southwest of Berlin that is called Ziesen, Zeesen. And that's why it's called Radio Ziesen, because that's where the antennas were. That's where they had the whole technology in place. Right. And it was part of the German broadcasting system, which was known as Radio Berlin or the German broadcasting system, and that belonged to the post office. When the Nazis came into power in 1933, Himmler grabbed it and said, we will start broadcasting this to show the world how great we are. Now, just to understand, this is not just broadcasting in Germany. They could reach Chicago with that radio station. And they were broadcasting German, Nazi propaganda in English, just all the way to New York, to Chicago, the East Coast. Anybody who wanted to could tune in. In 1936, the Olympic Games took place in Berlin. The Nazis were in power already for 3 years, and they saw the Olympic Games as something that they could really use for their propaganda.
I mean, still to this day, they use that. They use the World Cup. That's still a huge source of national pride for countries to host.
And that's when the Nazis really rolled out everything they knew. They started things like, for example, the torchbearer from the Olympic flame. That was an invention of the Nazis. It did not exist prior to 1936. So the Olympic flame was something where the whole world could see all these athletes coming back to Greece, getting the flame in Greece at Mount Olympus, and then traveling throughout Europe. And they had movies, it was like in the weekly news reels, how far and who's running, and all these images came together. They the whole spectacle of the Olympic Games was that was the first time it was really used for that type of propaganda. So the radio system was developed to a point where people were listening to what was happening in Berlin during the Olympic Games. In the middle of the night, they'd wake up just to listen to this broadcast. And it was broadcast in English and French and Spanish. There were people in Buenos Aires who were listening to what was happening in Berlin. And of course in Arabic, and in Turkish, and in Farsi, and in Urdu. And that's when the idea came up that is the most important market for the Nazis to gain power, because the fundamental idea is there already. The supremacy idea. We are the best, and we have been humiliated by the British, by all these others. We are the best of people, and now here we are living in misery while the world is moving forward. It's not our fault, it's their fault.
Well, I hear a lot of people nowadays say that Hitler totally revived the German economy, but we all know that's bullshit. It's weird how it's one of those things that has propagated.
Well, he did revive it. It's the fact only remained he revived it with borrowed good money. And,
right.
There's this ridiculous myth or legend out there that he built the Autobahns. Yeah, it's true. He did build some Autobahns, but they were actually invented in Italy, and they didn't build them in Italy. They started, the whole plan was already started in Germany before Hitler came to power. What Hitler really did, and what made people in Germany extremely proud, is he rebuilt the army, even though they're not allowed to. And the French, who were occupied the western part, the industrial part of Germany at that time, they were occupied it. And there were people were going broke because there was general strikes. The people did not want to work, so that the French would take away everything because the Germans couldn't meet the reparations bills. And Hitler said, we will march in there. And he moved his army in there, and the French did nothing. The English did nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was afraid of a war again after World War I. So they were on this appeasement thing. Let him have it. It won't change anything. When he marched into Austria, it was not just to unify Germany and Austria. It was to, get a hold of loot, money, gold, reserves,
Right.
industry. Yeah. When he moved into Czechoslovakia, it was the same reason. Czechoslovakia had one of the most advanced arms and military development at the time in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
They had factories. They had all these. It was like one of the most modern countries in Europe. And they moved in. They took hold of the whole country instead of just the piece that was promised to them in Munich in 1938. And the British and the French did nothing. And he just thought, okay, now it's time to move into Poland. And Poland had an agreement with France and with Germany and with England that they would protect Poland in case of something. And Germany decided, okay, then we'll make a deal with Russia, because France and England could not make a deal with Russia.
Right.
Yeah. They didn't want to make a deal, and they kept on sending people who Stalin didn't want to talk to. And Stalin said, let's make a deal. So the Nazis and Stalin made a deal. It was the Hitler-Stalin Pact. That's what it's called in Germany. It's not called the Molotov-Ribbentrop. It's called Hitler-Stalin because it was between two dictators. And again, England and France did nothing. And when Poland was taken, half of it went to the Germans and the other half went to the Soviets. And the English and French did nothing. And that was in September 1939. And it took until May 1940 when the Germans attacked Denmark, Norway, took that, and they took the Benelux countries, meaning Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg, and moved in on France. And that started World War II as we know it today, because the only one who said, we will not give in, is Churchill.
Right.
Yeah. So when Hitler came to power, he could have been stopped much earlier. But it was the appeasement policy. It was this, we don't want to go to war ever again. Mm-hmm. It was all the idea of there's no need. And that's how he got what he got. It's really, it's devastating when you think of how it's taught today, that people don't understand that it's really just somebody being clever and smart and having all his henchmen around him doing what they think is good for themselves and just grabbing everything.
Right. I mean, hindsight is always 20/20. That's obviously true. But this isn't something that's uncommon nowadays. Like, even today, we would always rather give in to enemies than to just declare war. I mean, there hasn't been a war declared since World War II. Even these forever conflicts that happen in the Middle East and all of that, those were never wars, where one nation declared war on the other and it was a war fought to the finish. And even today, like, you see that no matter what the Muslim countries do, it's very hard to draw a true response from the West. It's always basically just to try to get them to stop whatever they're doing.
But that again has a lot to do with Radio Ziesen, which brings me back to what happened between 1939 and 1945. Now, the radio station Ziesen was extremely popular in the Muslim world because 50% of the whole organization went to the Muslim world. Mm-hmm. What I mean is Germany's at war with Britain, with all these countries that they've occupied, with Russia, with America, and you would imagine that using propaganda would be really important for them to get to the Russians and so on. And here they are spending 50% of the whole budget, which is tremendous, just on the Muslim world. So what did that mean? That meant that between March 1939, until April 1945, they had daily broadcasts in a lot in Arabic, but in different dialects, in Turkish, in Farsi, which is Persian, and in Urdu, which is the language that the Muslims speak, or that part of India spoke at that time, that later became Pakistan.
Right.
And the Orient Desk, that's what it was called, had a total staff of around 300, and 90 people of those 300 came from the Arab world and were part of al-Husseini's band or gang or clique. And they did nothing else but prepare these broadcasts. Now, when I say broadcasts, what I mean is they used infotainment. This was not just somebody screaming or something like that. There were jokes, and there were news, and there was music, and they brought with them, they got the best radio hosts, the most popular radio hosts. And radio at that time was extremely popular.
I mean, think about War of the Worlds. People thought there was an actual alien invasion when they aired. Like, it was that convincing.
It was not. And we're speaking about a population that is over 70% illiterate.
Right.
And if you have radio in a cafe or in the bazaar or at the barber shop or in a public space, people are less glued to the radio. But they had entertainment. They were listening to something they could understand, to a voice that they believed. If you have somebody who you believe, I'm saying like Tucker Carlson today, he's talking nonsense. Yeah, but you got thousands of people listening to him, or millions, who believe because he's popular.
Right.
So you have popular voices, and they believed, and they kept on saying, beware of the Jew, they're going to take over, they're going to rape your women, they're going to eat your children. They had all these terrible things about Jews. And the idea in the Arab world was, okay, there are Jews here, and we have to beware of them, just like in Germany. And Jews were easily identifiable. They had different names. They were part of society, but they weren't Arab. They were Jews. They had a different culture. They were dhimmi. That was known. That's part of the culture. It's part of the background.
Well, it's also a self-fulfilling prophecy for them, because the dhimmis, it showed that if they let them rise up and have any kind of equality in other places, look what happens.
Yeah, and that's why they really believed it, and that's why when I'm in touch with quite a few historians here in Europe, we are all convinced, without Radio Ziesen, the expulsion of Jews from the Arab lands post-World War II would have never happened.
Right.
That's where people really believed that we have to get rid of these people. They weren't as violent and killed so many. There were, rapes and murders and killings, but not in the extent that happened in Europe. But let's get rid of them. Let's force them out. Away what they possess. Let's force them to leave within a certain period of time. We'll give them 48 hours. We'll give them 2 weeks, but they got to go. We don't care where they
possessions here.
Yeah, and leave everything they own over here. And they took away everything, and they pushed all the Jews out. And a direct result, I personally believe, and many others also believe, of Radio Ziesen, the impact. Now, it also landed on the idea that the Muslim per se, Islam per se, is the highest possible value, and that they've been taken aback by the Zionist. Because once Zionism was, viewed as the enemy, it was easy to say that's what happened. And that's after World War II. strange as this might sound to many, more Nazis fled Europe to the Middle East than to Latin America.
I find that fascinating. I know it's true. It's just I find it fascinating that they felt more comfortable in Arab countries in the Middle East than they did in South America, where there were already thriving German populations.
But there were thriving German populations in Arab countries too, except that we usually don't know about it. One very thriving German community existed in Alexandria in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Two of the two brothers from that community had made a huge career in the Nazi Party. That was Rudolf Hess, the deputy of Alfred Hitler, and his younger brother Alfred. Rudolf Hess and Alfred Hess were both born in Alexandria, Egypt, to a German family that was a very wealthy and well-off family in Egypt, involved in trade, import-export. And Rudolf Hess and Alfred returned to Germany to fight for the Kaiser in World War I. They remained in Germany, in Munich, when World War I was over. Alfred went back to university. Rudolf and Alfred were early members. First they were in the Tula Society, and then they became early members of the Nazi Party. And they were personal friends of Adolf Hitler. Like I said, Rudolf Hess was the deputy of Adolf Hitler, and Alfred returned to Egypt around 1925, and he helped organize what was then the start of the Muslim Brotherhood, together with al-Banna. And then they needed funding, and that came from the Nazi Party too, through a guy by the name of Wolfgang Stellbogen. So they got funds from the Nazis. The Nazis saw the Muslim Brotherhood as their natural allies in the Middle East. And the plan was that once the war in North Africa is won by Rommel, Alfred Hess will be the governor of what would then be the Middle Eastern Gau. And they would plan to take, to destroy all the Jews in Palestine and reinstate the Mufti over there as a subordinate to Alfred Hess.
Wow. Well, Alex, we come to the end of our time. I keep these to an hour, but I'm blown away. As always, I'm speechless at some of this stuff, and it's just I want people to be able to reach out to you and learn more about this stuff. So I'm gonna be sharing this around to my different groups, and I'm also going to be sharing your Twitter account. And
Sure.
I hope we can do a follow-up on this and really get into it again.
Well, I would love to, and I would love to go into the post-World War II era where the Nazis in the Middle East still had tremendous influence and helped design the Middle East as we know it today.
Well, let's do it next Monday. We could do it same time, same place.
We'll talk about that, and then we'll post it once I have to look at my schedule and see if I can do it then.
Okay. If not, I'll keep an open schedule for you because, as I said, it's important that we get into this stuff.
Well, I hope the listeners enjoyed it too and learned something, and we'll move it on.
I'm already getting a lot of great feedback, so people are writing left and right. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. I will be back on Thursday with Tom Luongo. We will be talking about the foundations of communism and the current situation in Britain. I am looking forward to it, and thank you, everybody. Please follow the host, follow the speakers, and we will talk soon. Thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you.
My fellow Americans, tonight I am speaking to you because there is a growing humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border.
In all honesty, a border wall or steel slats won't work. But great bodies of water will separate us from the horrible Mexican rapists. Introducing the 2019 Trump Great Border Moat. Stocked with the most aggressive penis fish, incredible man-eating alligators, and unbelievable genetically modified moose-cocked rape dolphins as well as flying, migrant-eating sharkfish. So incredible.
I swore to protect our country, and that is what I will always do. So